Okay.
It would be a mistake to think that this is ironic, a caricature of the historical accounts. On the contrary, it is a very mild expression of the contradictory replies not meeting the questions which all the historians give, from the compilers of memoirs and the histories of separate states to the writers of general histories and the new histories of the culture of that period. The strangeness and absurdity of these replies arise from the fact that modern history, like a deaf man, answers questions no one has asked. If the purpose of history be to give a description of the movement of humanity and of the peoples, the first question, in the absence of a reply to which all the rest will be incomprehensible, is what is the power that moves peoples? To this, modern history laboriously replies either that Napoleon was a great genius, or that Louis XIV was very proud, or that certain writers wrote certain books. All that may be so, and mankind is ready to agree with it, but it is not what was asked. All that would be interesting if we recognized a divine power based on itself and always consistently directing its nations through Napoleon's, Louis's, and writers. But we do not acknowledge such a power, and therefore before speaking about Napoleon's, Louis's, and authors, we ought to be shown the connection existing between these men and the movement of the nations. Instead of a divine power, some other force has appeared. If instead of a divine power, some other force has appeared, it should be explained in what this new force consists, for the whole interest of history lies precisely in that force. History seems to assume that this force is self-evident and known to everyone. But in spite of every desire to regard it as known, anyone reading many historical works cannot help doubting whether this new force, so variously understood by the historians themselves, is really quite well known to everybody.
Conclude chapter 1. Comments so far? What do you think he tried to say in the portion we just read?
Well, he, after finishing the little discourse, or the little summary, sarcastic summary of historians tend to, how historians tend to describe historical events using that example he did.
Which is a continuation.
He says essentially they're answering, in many ways they're answering a question that no one has asked.
Which is?
Well, nobody asked the question, so it's that.
What decided history?
Basically,
yeah,
right.
So, yeah.
And he says that but yeah, like the question that he's dealing with right now is, what is this force or this power that moves nations?
That's just incredible observation in his time, right? Considering. Yeah.
I think he is, if I remember correctly, he's about to expound on the fact that there are historians that will
try to answer the question in different settings.
Yeah, with the three he actually pointed out, the first being
preliminary histories.
It takes place through men in power, or through the cultural or even like ideological environment that events take place in, and that those being the things that are the force that drive historical events.
Third?
What's the third? I can't remember because he doesn't really allude to it very well in this part right here.
Okay. Can I start with chapter 2 now?
Sure.
So I want to start reading. I read this before, so. But what force moves the nations? Biographical historians and historians of separate nations understand this force as a power inherent in heroes and rulers. That is one opinion, basically. In their narration of events occur solely by the will of Napoleon and Alexander, in general, of the persons they describe. The answers given by this kind of historian to the question for what force causes events to happen are satisfactory only as long as there is but one historian to each event. As soon as historians' different nationalities' tendencies begin to describe the same event, the replies they give immediately lose all meaning. For this force is understood by them all not only differently, but often in quite contradictory ways. One historian says that the event was produced by Napoleon's power, another that it was produced by Alexander's, the third that it was due to the power of some other person. So they lost all credibility in the sense, Besides this, historians of that kind contradict each other even in their statements as to the force on which the authority of some particular person was based. Yeah, true. What's right, Napoleon? So there's a Bonapartist said that Napoleon's power was based on his virtue and genius. Lafray, a Republican, said it was based on his trickery and deception of the people. So the historians of this class, by mutually destroying one another's position, destroy the understanding of the force which produces events, and furnish no reply to historians' essential question. Writers of universal history who deal with all the nations seem to recognize how erroneous is the specialist historian's view of the force which produces events.
So now he's moving on to a new perspective.
A new perspective, okay. They don't recognize it as a power inherent in heroes, rulers, but and resultant of a multiplicity of variously directed forces.
The third one I was trying to remember.
In describing a war for the subjugation of people, a general historian looks for the cause of the event not in the power of one man, but in the interaction of many persons connected with the event. According to this view, the power of a historical personage represented by the product of many forces can no longer, it would say, be regarded as a force that itself produces events. Yet in most cases, universal historians still employ the conception of power as a force that itself produces events, and treat it as their cause. In their exposition, a historical character is the first product of his time. This power only is the resultant of various forces, and then his power, it is itself a force producing events. Gavinius, Schlosser, that's okay. This guy's a loser. Joking. It's a loser. I'm sorry. Funny. Trying to remember the names. It's a loser. Okay. And others. For instance, at one time proved Napoleon to be a product of the revolution, the ideas for 1789, and so forth. And another plainly see that the campaign of 1812 and other things they do not like was simply the product of Napoleon's misdirected will. Even the same person. And that is the very ideas of 1789 were rested in their development by Napoleon's caprice. What is the word? Caprice? Okay. The ideas of the revolution, the general temper of the age produced Napoleon's power. But Napoleon's power suppressed the ideas of the revolution and general temper of the age. Excuse me. Talk all morning, so I need to drink a little bit. Sorry. Literally my tongue dry. This curious contradiction is not accidental. Not only does it occur at every step, but the universal historian's accounts are all made up of a chain of such contradictions. This contradiction occurs because at the entering the field of analysis, the universal historians stop halfway. To find the component forces equal to the compositive or resultant force, the sum of the components must equal the resultant. This condition is never observed by the universal historians, so to explain the resultant forces they were obliged to admit. In addition to the insufficient components, another unexplained force affecting the resultant action. That's a long way to saying something. Anyway, specialist historian describes the campaign for 1813 or the restoration of the Bourbons plainly assert that these events were produced by the will of Alexander, but the universal historian Gavinius, refuting this opinion of the specialist historian, tries it. So he talked the general historians, specialist historian, tried to prove that the campaign of 1813 and the restorations of Bourbons were due to other things besides Alexander's will, such as the activity of Stein, Metternich, Madame de Stael, Talleyrand, Fichet, Chateaubriand, that's a strange word, sorry, Chateau, am I Chateau or Chateau?
It's going to be Chateaubriand, I don't know.
Chateaubriand, that's a strange name, that's French, I believe.
Yeah.
And others. The history evidently decomposes Alexander's power into the components. Talleyrand, Chateaubriand, and the rest. But the sum of the components, that is, the interactions of Chateaubriand, Talleyrand, Madame de Stael, and others, evidently does not equal the resultant, namely, this phenomenon of millions of Frenchmen submitting to the Bourbons. The Chateaubriand, Madame de Stael, and others spoken certain words to one another only affected their mutual relations, but does not account for the submission of millions. And therefore, to explain how from these relations of theirs, the submission of millions of people resulted, that is, whole component forces equal to 1, A gave a resultant equal to 1,000 times A. The historian is again obliged to fall back on power. The first that he has denied and to recognize it as a resultant of the forces, that is, he has to admit an unexplained force acting on the resultant. And that is just what the universal historian do. And consequently, it is not only universal historian, specialist historian. Consequently, it is not only contrary to specialist historians, but contrary themselves. That is such insightful observations, right? So, can you believe that? All the world in the history wrote, everybody proud with what they wrote, and here Tolstoy looked around and said, "Oh, you guys contradict each other. No one else really figure anything out, you know." So, well, that's most of human thoughts, you know. Sorry, it's true, right? So, peasants having no clear idea of the cause of rain, saying that according to whether they want rain or fine weather. The wind was blown the cloud away, or the wind has brought out the cloud. First the egg or the chicken, or something like that nature. And in the same way, the universal historians sometimes, when it pleases them or fits in with their theory, see then power is the result of events. And sometimes when they want to prove something else, then that power produces events. That is contradictory, right? As confusing. So at this point, comments before we move on? Hey, look at this. Look at the page number. Can you read aloud here?
Oh, 4,444.
To what? Look at the page.
117 pages.
Is that crazy?
Crazy.
Just moments ago, I saw 11:7. So.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy, huh? Yeah. So I just noticed that. So.
Wow.
Yeah. That's interesting. Everywhere. Sorry. When God wants to do something, He's everywhere, man. So.
Good.
I've been noticing 444 for a while, so I 117.
Yeah.
Go ahead. 118 as well. So.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, I mean, I don't think I have any additional comments. I myself am understanding everything really well, but are there any points that
I'm gonna raise up my feet a little bit. Sorry, I'm polite, but let me do that. Is that okay for you?
Yeah.
So sorry. What do you say? You said you don't have a lot of comments on this portion.
No, not really.
Okay. Hold up. There we go.
Anything I say, I think we're just gonna be
repeating
what he
saying.
said already.
So how do you grasp what he said? Am I?
He's still building his
case in a sense.
His case, yeah.
Okay.
He's about to introduce that third
history.
class of historians.
So we have specialists. Then we have
universal.
Universal. Okay. He just give us some terms for categorize historical views or historians themselves. Yeah. Okay. Okay, the third class. Okay, that's interesting. So that's a good place to stop, actually, huh? Yeah. Okay, the third class. I want you to read on.
Sure.
Read slow, with understanding. You can fast, but with understanding, so I can.
Yeah.
Apply my mind. The reason I want to read is.
You can stop me if you need.
Is because when I read, I understand much better than this. Hearing it, just sorry.
Oh, really? It's
yeah,
for me.
Is that right?
Okay,
let me read it then, because English is still a second language to me.
Sure.
So it's like when I hear it, I still don't grasp what is said. So.
I do really enjoy reading though, but you go ahead.
Oh yeah, I know you do. So yeah, it's like when I read it, I can get 90% out of what they're reading. When I heard somebody saying it, I almost get.
When I'm reading, I have to focus too much on my pronunciation to be able to.
Oh yeah, okay.
Like really.
When I heard you read it, for example, I just try to give an objective assessment of my English skill, whatever the word, understanding level. So when you read, I heard it, I maybe make 50% at least. So there's a huge difference there. So, so my point, I want to read, but sometimes I like to take over because I want to understand. So that's a 40% difference, so making sense to you? So, okay. For discussion purposes, I got to know what I'm talking about. So. Okay. Just give you a context why sometimes I want to read. Okay, so. A third class are historians, the so-called historians of culture. Oh, that's the third class. Cultural historian, right? So, following the path laid down by the universal historians who sometimes accept writers and ladies. Okay, as forces produce events. That's an interesting pair there, writers and ladies. Okay. Again, take them force to be something quite different. The seed in what is called culture, in mental activity. The historians of culture are quite consistent in regard to their progenitors, the writers of universal historians, for if historical events may be explained by the fact that a certain person treated one another in such and such ways, why not explain them by the fact that such and such a people wrote such and such books? Of the immense number of indications accompanying every vital phenomenon, these historians select the indication of intellectual activity and see that this indication is a cause. But I may be lost there actually. Immense numbers of indications accompanying. Okay.
Without too much serious thought about it, I almost see ourselves as falling into this category a little bit. In the way that we approach history, we always were like, I'm not saying that it's particularly limiting perspective.
Sure, yeah.
But that we, in our study of history and our examination of history, really do take the stance of seeing
culture
as explained by the flow of ideologies, from like even a sociological perspective sometimes too, and as explained by cultural explanation.
You mean that's we look at history, you and us, or
like
the
I'm not
material
thinking too
approach?
critically about it. Like perhaps we do take a broader approach, but it is I think that is the primary standpoint from which we observe history, and I'm wondering how he's gonna even
refute that.
Yeah,
look
refute
at
this
that.
perspective.
Yeah.
It might be enlightening in some way. Who knows?
Well, a better grasp what are you talking about here? So
Is something not making sense?
not really. It has some inventive terms. Obviously, he used it to describe something in a systematic way he wanted to do, but it's new to me, So
Sure.
like every philosophy, every theory, you got to come with their own terms, to build a systematic understanding. So therefore, the word is not in the connotation of normally the word means in other context. It has to really figure out what he's saying there, right? So, for example, the word called the indications. Well, indications of what? It's a very very common word, but in this context, it means something. Means in his system. So, what is the indication here? How you define in his context?
I would say that it could be, it is related, if not synonymous, with the word component in a way, like the component of a historical event that leads to a specific phenomenon. Because he uses the example of intellectual activity as one of these indications, actually the particular indication that these cultural historians
he was talking about the thoughts developed life, basically. Okay, yeah.
That's one of the indications of the myriad of indications that are involved in a historical event. He's saying they take this one particular indication that is of intellectual activity.
So after the many elements of that, or component of that, he used intellectual activity as one of the indications, the measured by the historians.
And we can see here, even from Tolstoy's perspective, that he does, in fact, imply directly that there are more indications involved in an event than merely intellectual activity.
Therefore, this historian chooses only intellectual activity as one of those things. They made a mistake in a sense, right? So
he hasn't particularly said that directly yet, but he may.
Yeah.
He may.
I think he intended to expand on that. Yeah, true. I mean, that's I hope we're not like that. I know I'm not that.
No.
I had to openly declare that.
Yeah.
I think economic, culture, intellectual thoughts all converge together, to drive the history flow.
Most certainly not a negligible indication of historical explanation in any way.
Yeah.
Seeing things from a cultural and even intellectual and ideological standpoint of how things.
Yeah, that's where his word means different thing to us, So, for example, when he uses the word culture, he's more talking about the thought life of something, substantiated through books or readings or intellectual thought life passed on, So, yes, that's my point, So for me, culture is a whole list of things of a society existed, So or people became to be. So.
Yeah, which is similar, but I think he's using culture in the sense that culture is
intellectual part of it.
The ideas that flow through the minds of a people that cause them to do things in the way that they do them.
See, that's his definition or use really that
similar,
word,
but not as perhaps as broad or maybe even insightful as the idea of culture that we have.
Yeah, culture can be used in many contexts by itself.
It's a pretty profound word. Yeah.
Yeah, I just recognized recently doing some reading about American modern history after Second World, and they always talk about the culture influence society, stuff like that. It seems similar like what we're talking about, but actually it's the culture defined as a popular trend of thing, the things that are beyond political, economic, those elements, more broad than that. But in my understanding, culture is even beyond that. So
Sure.
if I make it sense to you, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely manifest as a part of it,
Yeah.
but it's so far beyond that. So I hope it's not to do comparisons. I'm some
No.
reality check there.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, I want you to read on that. So.
Sure. But despite their endeavors to prove that the cause of events lies in intellectual activity, only by a great stretch can one admit that there is any connection between intellectual activity and the movement of peoples. And in no case can one admit that intellectual activity controls people's actions, for that view is not confirmed by such facts as the very cruel murders of the French Revolution resulting from the doctrine of the equality of man,
Oh, that's how you made the link. I see.
or the very cruel wars and executions resulting from the preaching of love.
That's crazy. Okay.
Very contradictory, huh?
Yeah. Okay, I got it. That's his definitions now. So got it. I try to see why he uses certain words and evidently imply something.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
But even admitting as correct all the cunningly devised arguments with which these histories are filled.
Okay, that'd be good for you if you're familiar or have some impression to stop a new concept like that, indicators,
Sure.
culture, maybe stop there. Said, okay, I think he uses word in this context. What that's what he why he uses word for. So, or what is used word for. So that way we can get some meaningful discussions, or else we continue to carry on connotation. We think we know each one, but we don't necessarily know, and right? So all in our own perceptions. My point is, it's a good point to stop there. Said, let's have discussion on this term. So
Sure.
yeah, to figure out what he tried to say, right? So go ahead.
Are you want me
To continue, yeah,
to continue reading?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. But even admitting as correct all the cunningly devised arguments with which these histories are filled, admitting that nations are governed by some undefined force called an idea.
See, idea.
Yeah.
That's word defined, right? He called it a force. So obviously, it's not a common way to look at idea, So
Yeah.
what is idea in here? You think about it. The example is equality of man, idea for love, and right being praised, those kind of things. So let's give a zoomed in example because he only uses words. It actually means something, right? So he knows how those ideas are being fostered, populated, and become an influential force in human minds, right? Even to the extent and cause a certain historical events to happen according to certain historians. So let's study a little bit for your for the case study, okay, from you. What does equality man mean? How it lead to historical events?
How does the idea
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
equality of man?
yeah. Do you have any clue what are you talking about? That the equality man and the idea caused French Revolution?
Well, he's using that as a contradictory element to what resulted in the French Revolution and the ideas that were supposed to have driven it, which was in this case supposed to be the equality of man.
I understand what he tried to do, but I'm talking about do you know what his background knowledge to lead to this point, this discernment?
His background knowledge.
Yeah, for example, where's the equality idea, equality man came from? Do you have any concept in Tolstoy's mind what he talking about?
So essentially, you're asking how did Tolstoy come across this
exactly
idea?
how he learned this idea, then decided, or through what he read history about, it caused the French Revolution.
Well, I mean, in his.
I'm not for you to query. I'm just trying to detect. Do you understand what he's talking about here? Go ahead.
Well, I assume he's using this example through perhaps material he's read concerning the French Revolution and how, like the actual documented events of what of maybe speeches or things people wrote in that period and where
Yeah.
those things
So
are,
the authors
ideas
write
came from.
expounded on the. I think it's one of the major thing about the Enlightenment, right? The movement
The
Enlightenment.
Enlightenment period. For
Yes,
sure.
exactly.
Yeah. And the
So those
philosophers
ideas begin to populate it.
that populate those ideas. During that
Exact
time.
people begin to embrace it, and then the reality is that there's monarchy, ruler like Louis XIV, that is just literally contradicting this wheel of life, right? This wheel of equity to man, especially in the political arena, right? So they said, no, if we embrace equity to mankind, so we can have a superior man, like a think it's divinely set up like a monarchism, right? Like a Louis XIV thing is about the law, about the people, other people, right? So French Revolution, you know what the French Revolution fundamentally challenging about? Why people revolted against the monarchy? I'm just talking, so
What exactly?
Why they revolted? What the revolution is about? What they fighting for?
Well, I think the
History for them.
the French society during that period was really, there's like a huge dichotomy between those who were in the position
upper
of wealth and the position
aristocracy and monarchy.
Poor,
upper, then the middle merchants, stuff like that. Middle officials, whatever.
Obviously, there's a lot that came in that, as he even mentions a little bit here, from the era of Louis XIV.
Yes,
and how those had huge rippling effects to French society in that time.
Yeah.
Also, their help or their assistance in the American Revolutionary War got them into a lot of debt, I think, too.
Yes.
And there were tons of taxes that they began to levy on the people of their nations, so that brought a sense of obviously that was
one of the
very
reasons.
upsetting for the society in that time.
Sure,
as well.
sure, yeah.
And I think the whole social construct of France was
the hierarchical construct.
Extremely hierarchical.
This really hugely contradictory to the idea of a government equality man-based, right? So the idea. So, what I try to carry you is try to reflect through your understanding or knowledge of history. Try to map out what's when Tolstoy uses words, write those things. We know what he's thinking about, So obviously that's what he thought about those stuff, So that's his idea. Equity in mind is this idea eventually populated, impassioned the people, then caused a revolution, right? So French Revolution. So is that making sense to you? So So then French Revolution turned out to be not equity in mind. It's totally off the target, am I? Not in the center. So it become contradictory to the idea even they start with, So it's interesting, That's his observation point in a sense and conclusion here. So especially with the reading of a history from that period of time, am I? So I try to gain with you to come to some agreement with Tolstoy's mind when he uses terms or choose to express those thoughts. So, go ahead.
So I'll start this sentence over again so we're on a good track, I guess.
Okay.
It says, but even admitting as correct all the cunningly devised arguments with which these histories are filled, admitting that nations are governed by some undefined force called an idea, history's essential question still remains unanswered, and to the former power of monarchs, and to the influence of advisors and other people introduced by the universal historians, another newer force, the idea, is added, the connection of which with the masses needs explanation.
Yeah. The French Revolution came from idea. What about the American? That's all in the back head when Tolstoy write those things, right? So, go ahead.
It is impossible to understand that Napoleon had power and so events occurred. With some effort, one may even conceive that Napoleon, together with other influences, was the cause of an event. But how a book, Le Contrat Social, had the effect of making Frenchmen begin to drown one another.
Who wrote that book? That's called the Social Contract, and mine that's Rousseau's book. Okay, so.
That was Rousseau or Locke? I don't remember.
No, it's Rousseau's book. Yeah, called in China called the 社会契约论.
Huh.
Yeah, it's a lengthy book actually. So.
Interesting. Had the effect of making
Locke read the idea is whole garment being, I forgot the name, but the name garment is mentioned in the title. So.
Yeah, I don't remember that either.
This is Rousseau's book. So.
Interesting. But how this book had the effect of making Frenchmen begin to drown one another cannot be understood without an explanation of the causal nexus of this new force with the event.
Nexus, what nexus means?
I'll actually know.
A connection or series of connections linking two or more things. A central or focal point. So go ahead. Well, I like what we are reading. And mine's like try to get to know what Tolstoy is thinking.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Undoubtedly, some relation exists between all who live contemporaneously, and so it is impossible to find some connection between the intellectual activity of men and their historical movements, just as such a connection may be found between the movements of humanity in commerce, handicraft, gardening, or anything else you please. But why intellectual activity is considered by historians of culture to be the cause or expression of the whole historical movement is hard to understand. Only the following considerations can have led the historians to such a conclusion. Number one, that history is written by learned men, and so it is natural and agreeable for them to think that the activity of their class supplies the basis of the movement of all humanity, just as a similar belief is natural and agreeable to traders, agriculturalists, and soldiers. If they do not express it, that is merely because traders and soldiers do not write history.
It's a little bit arrogant. Mine's exactly the point. So,
Yeah.
the intellectual is only part of a player in history, So,
Right.
Go ahead.
And two, that spiritual activity, enlightenment, civilization, culture, ideas are all indistinct, indefinite conceptions under whose banner it is very easy to use words having a still less definite meaning, and which can therefore be readily introduced into any theory.
That's right. How you ascertain those things, how you identify them, how you describe those things, how you communicate those things.
Agree on the definition of
Exactly. So that's very side observation. That's when we are like Tolstoy. He think the right question, So yeah.
But not to speak of the intrinsic quality of histories of this kind, which may possibly even be of use to someone for something. The histories of culture.
Okay, let me ask you the question. Intrinsic quality of histories with this kind. What do you mean? Intrinsic qualities. What do you mean?
I think that refers to like the quintessential like innate qualities of such an approach. So like what really make this approach to history stand out, or what
the virtues, the merit of this approach?
That's I think, if I'm understanding correctly too, I think that is a good way to put it. But it's like what really makes this approach to history stand out from the other approaches. It's like the particular
I see.
Almost unshared aspects of this kind of approach.
Peculiar into this way, basically. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I try to understand what he tried to say. So, his English is very lengthy in this way, or rather, his thoughts were lengthy, and try to be a little bit academical or philosophical, and make it hard read actually for me. So yeah, I try to figure out what he tried to say. That's all.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Hold on. Yeah.
History give you three categories of histories: specialist history.
What's going to be nice is
What is it called next one? History.
Universal history.
Universal. The culture, right?
What's really going to be cool is he's going to actually use metaphors to
describe them.
The
Great, yeah.
That's what this next.
Okay, I'm glad you read ahead of me. So.
The histories of culture, to which all general histories tend more and more to approximate, are significant from the fact that after seriously and minutely examining various religions, philosophic, and political doctrines as causes of events, as soon as they have to describe an actual historic event, such as the campaign of 1812, for instance, they involuntarily describe it as resulting from an exercise of power. And say plainly that that campaign was the result of Napoleon's will. Speaking so, the historians of culture involuntarily contradict themselves.
So they contradict themselves.
And show that the new force they have devised does not account for what happens in history. And that history can only be explained by introducing a power which they apparently do not recognize.
Ha!
So all of them the trap of
falling apart.
Include the variable of this power driving the force of history.
Yeah.
All of them. They all reach that conclusion.
That's amazing observation.
Pretty crazy.
Obviously, he had read a lot of books to see the flow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that's wonderful reflection. So that is puzzling, exasperating. If I read a lot of books of history, it's like I can learn how to really understand how history works. So.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to take a little bit rest. So.